There's no easy way to start this review.
So I'm just going to say it. Dragon Age: The Veilguard is an identity politics simulator disguised as a fantasy RPG.
It's boring, it's bland, it's basic, it's predictable, it's dull.
Dragon Age: The Veilguard is a colossal disappointment. I really can't put it any other way.
Okay, so a week into the game's life and the Veilguard has polarized the gaming scene, sparking a myriad of opinions on its story, gameplay, and subjective quality of both. In the midst of Sonic Shadow Generations, Black Ops 6, and the new Life is Strange title, Dragon Age has a lot of people foaming at the mouth for the subjects it tries to tackle and how well they do or don't portray them. The funny thing is, looking past the content creators and YouTubers losing their shit over the Veilguard, most outside those circles haven't expressed the same level of disappointment. When you cut out the white noise, the Veilguard is a decent action RPG with a solid story that loses some of its identity in the process of becoming what it is, but when a company loses most of its senior staff and goes through development hell, changes are bound to occur. It's been 10 years since the last entry, and the series has mutated to something I'd argue is still quite familiar, despite being so far removed from its roots. A lot of people have made it clear where they stand on this game, and I want to share my 2 cents on the criticisms I feel are fair, unfair, and those that are in between.
I knew him as soulless. Smart, thoughtful, loved to hear himself talk. But long ago, he had a different name.
The Veilguard's narrative is a solid follow-up to the Inquisition in that, like the previous entries, elaborates on certain story beats hinted at by its predecessors. The goal of the Veilguard is all about putting past experiences and issues facing the world of Thetis into perspective. Archdemons, the Blight, the Elves, the Maker. The mysteries of these subjects, among others, are explored in a way that doesn't feel poorly written or arbitrary, but rather makes sense of why the world of Dragon Age is the way that it is. In that regard, I don't think it's fair to say that this game appeases newcomers at the expense of longtime fans, considering how important the context is. If you're a day one Dragon Age enjoyer that wants to know more about where the Blight comes from, how the Elves came to be, the context of the war that ascended the Evanores, all of that is here. The Veilguard does a great job of making you feel like everything you've experienced from Origins to Inquisition has been leading up to this game. On that note, I've seen a few complaints about the lack of Dragon Keep and how, unlike 2 in Inquisition, the choices you made in previous entries have little impact on the successor. I understand the grievance and think it's a fair critique, but it's worth noting that the Veilguard takes place on the other side of Thetis. The Warden's choices, Hawk's choices, and the Inquisitor's choices understandably might not have the most impact on lands largely removed from the settings those characters inhabited. The big issue is the presentation of this game's narrative. The games prior felt very pragmatic and mature in their presentation, while this game gives off a more upbeat MCU Pixar kind of vibe. And if that doesn't work for you, its story might be a bit of a turnoff.
You're worried about her.
I'm worried about everyone. Tired enough to admit it.
The party members are somewhat hit and miss for me, more than any other Dragon Age game, and the sentiment extends to the main character, Rook. None of them are poorly written in my opinion, but I can't help but feel like they all intentionally fit archetypes we've seen before. The no-nonsense gruffy soldier, the introverted historian/nerd, the calm and collected detective. In every game prior, your party members possessed a level of nuance that made them feel like they were more than their professions, but here it feels like they were made to check off a box. In a video I made prior, I expressed fear that this game's story would be simple and clear-cut, and while I feel like the narrative was spared, the party members were not. All of them have defining personalities that distinguish them from one another, but none of them challenge you in the same way Sten would for your lack of focus, or Fenris would for sympathizing with mages. There isn't a similar level of strife between the party of the Veilguard compared to the party of the Inquisition for being so different from one another. In the games prior, one of the most poetic aspects of them was bringing people of different races, backgrounds, and philosophies to watch them interact and attempt to coexist. Here, the sense of trust between companions feels unearned, and these feelings also extend to Rook. Now, to be fair to Rook, he exhibits problems we've seen in Dragon Age before. His dialogue wheel is extremely reminiscent of Hawke's dialogue wheel, in that he can be sweet, sour, or snarky with very little in between. Rook is unique in that, unlike protagonists prior, you can't even be a quarter as callous as them. In Dragon Age Origins, you can be an unfeeling, ruthless maniac, throwing the lives of innocents, including your companions, down the shitter for personal gain, and not being given the option to do so here feels like a missed opportunity. Another thing I want to talk about is the perceived wokeness this game has garnered. A lot of people have given the Veilguard shit for its social political commentary, specifically for race and LGBTQ, and to those people I have to ask, where have you been? DA has always been chock full of this kind of shit since the beginning. Entering gay relationships has been a thing since the first game. Non-straight characters have always elaborated on their sexual preference for the same gender, and Inquisition introduced a trans character. In Dragon Age Origins, the elves being subjected to slavery by humans for years, and after obtaining freedom, being forced into impoverished ghettos called alienages where they are preyed upon and belittled by humans, is a very obvious allegory for the slavery and segregation white people subjected African Americans to in the US. Playing as an elf will result in discrimination toward you, and the game actively gives you chances to call people out on it.
I beg your pardon? It's a rather impertinent accusation. No, I did not mean... That is to say,
A well-trained elven servant is highly valued in Orlais. They are nimble and dexterous, and many people find them pleasing to look at. No, I did not mean it that way. Oh, my words were clumsily chosen. I did not mean to offend. I am sorry. I did not realize that. It is so strange how long-held beliefs just seem natural and right, like there is no other way to feel.
Women are priests, artisans, shopkeepers, or farmers. They don't fight. Why would women ever wish to be men? That makes no sense. Do they also wish to live on the moon? That's as attainable.
Arisha Kost, Cunanam Ebrator. You have granted this woman Basalit An. By this admission, she now has the right to challenge you.
If you truly knew the Cune elf, you would not suggest I battle a female.
The point I'm trying to make is that this notion that real-world politics and social issues are things that have never been pushed or explored in Dragon Age is not true and never has been. All of this relates to Tosh, with them easily being one of the biggest points of contention in the game among fans for identifying as non-binary. Now, whether or not you feel like their character arc was poorly executed is an opinion I have no desire to sway you against or towards. Feel how you feel about it. But seeing so many YouTubers express so much contempt for Tosh gives me the impression most of them lack perspective. When I first played Origins, I resonated with the City Elf backstory because, while I can't claim to have experienced all the awful shit my character goes through, as a black person living in the US, looking at this origin story felt like looking in a mirror for me. It was cool to see a game company go out of their way to write a story so close to home for me that was rooted in real-world social issues I've experienced. Now, I wouldn't say Tosh's character is above criticism. The shortcomings of how they're written isn't entirely lost on me, and I wouldn't say you have to be non-binary to criticize Tosh either. But as someone who isn't non-binary, hearing these criticisms come largely from people who are seemingly also not non-binary, I have to wonder if any of them considered what a take would look like from someone who actually shares this struggle with Tosh. Also, there are very few quests that force you to have Tosh in your party, and the companion questline to help them figure out their identity is entirely optional. So this idea that the Veilguard is forcing a particular agenda on the player via Tosh is not true. If you don't want to do it, simply don't do it. If you don't want to use Tosh in the game, then don't. If you don't want your Rook to identify as non-binary or trans, then don't have them identify as non-binary or trans. It has always been up to you.
Varric, Solus isn't gonna stop just because an old friend asks nicely.
From its story to its characters to the gameplay, the Veilguard is all about change. I'm guessing a lot of people wanted it to be this subjective recollection of what they think Dragon Age used to be, but it's been 15 years since Origins was released, and story-wise, there's a 10-year gap between Inquisition and the Veilguard. Returning characters aren't how they were during their first introduction because time and experience have shifted their perspectives. In Origins, Morgan was a selfish, power-hungry Darwinist whose perspective stemmed from her lack of experience interacting with others. Now she actively assists others with the overarching goal of saving the world. In 2, Isabella was a free-spirited, self-serving pirate whose thievery of her relic inadvertently led to an invasion. Now she leads a group of fortune hunters who actively avoid stealing, fencing, or selling relics that are sacred to the cultures of Thetis. Solus has been alive for well over 1,000 years, and his lack of chains is one of the many contributors to his downfall, depending on your choices in the game. The Veilguard was never going to be this politically devoid CRPG nostalgia trip content creators think Origins was, and if that's the kind of game you're looking for better or worse, you won't find it in a modern BioWare title.